Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Clifford Winston, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Clifford, thank you so much for joining me.
For asking me to be here.
I'm excited to have another conversation today because you recently wrote a piece about President Trump's leadership style and what that really means and the implications for both the American people and the country moving forward. So can you talk to us about it? Because this is what the title was: What a Narcissistic Populist Presidency Means for American Policy and Its People. So some pretty strong words describing President Trump's leadership style.
I think there are two themes to his presidency and leadership style, as you say. One is he really tries to market himself, and marketing is the right word because that's what he likes to do, as a populist. He doesn't take hardline conservative views, the market is king and I only believe in the market. And he doesn't take liberal views, certainly, that we need government intervention. He'll go either way, depending on what he thinks he can market to the public. This is in your interest. And I'm, quote, representing you by doing, quote, the popular thing. So, that's where this populist idea comes. And I don't think there's any controversy about it. I think that he would own up to it. That's what he does. He's not a liberal, he's not a conservative, goes either way, but he's doing things that are in the interest of the public. But then there's the personal part of who he is as a human being. And again, I don't even think that's controversial. He's a narcissist. Anyone who says that I'm here, at God's mission, or says, I run the U.S., I run the world, there's somebody who looks back at his reflection and really it's a narcissistic type of person who does that. And obviously this is something that, I don't think I've ever even heard him deny him saying that. So it's an interesting tension, which we certainly, I don't think I've ever seen before. Certainly in the post-war period, we have it, of a president who's marked himself as a populist, but also has this personal characteristic as a narcissist. The implication of the piece is that this is going to have some implications for policy that are quite important and even played out over this weekend in a number of events that we can talk about.
And I want to get into that, but first, the idea of populism in the United States really cropped up in the late 19th century, in the 1880s and 1890s, with farmers in the United States essentially railing against the elites. So are you surprised to see someone like President Trump take on this populist stance? And has that ever really worked? Because when you're looking at President Trump, as of right now, as of when you and I are sitting here, he's the 720th richest person in the world, according to Forbes. His fortune sits right now at $5.3 billion. So is that really someone who should be a populist type leader?
Oh, that's what's the amazing thing, is that there's nothing really about Trump that at all speaks of populism. Just the opposite. His goal in life is to be accepted among the elite of any sort, and certainly the rich elite. He doesn't feel comfortable really with regular people. So it is amazing. But, he's been able to market this and was able to sort of touch the waters, in my view, first by talking about Obama and whether he was born in this country. That resonated with people, and he saw it. And he's then pursuing this anti-immigrant pattern or policy and orientation, which, again, has resonated with people, and simultaneously attacking liberals, elites, Harvard University, other types of elite institutions. It's working. I think, we need an in-depth study to understand why. I'm as puzzled as everybody else. But, I can't deny reality. So one would not expect him to really be the person you go to be the populist, but certainly the tone and orientation of his presidency is that. But remember, there's still another part that's critical, and that's his own personal characteristics.
And as you said, he is popular. His approval rating right now sits at 46%. And where he has the strongest support on policies are immigration. And that has really been controversial over the past couple of weeks with different anti-ICE protests and things like that. And he's taken this really hardline stance when it comes to immigration. So he is the standard bearer of the GOP. So do you see the GOP going more populist in the future? I mean, what does that look like to you? What are the implications here?
Let me also be clear. I would not say that Trump is particularly popular. I mean, 46% approval is not great. And
it's better than President Biden, though,
sure.
Last year. I will say that.
Okay, that's fair. But I don't know how often he's even got above 50%. What he is he holds passionate support. That's not much popular. Is the people who like him love him, and probably more than most leaders in the U.S. And they're really passionate about him. And so this, though, is getting him into a bit of trouble. We look at his immigration plan and the actions of ICE, all right, and people are very passionate about this. But now Trump has taken a detour on this recently when he said, well, maybe we're going to hold back on trying to deport people who work in agriculture, people who work in restaurants, people who work in manufacturing. Allegedly it's because his Secretary of Agriculture has pushed him in this direction. But he realizes, as I think anybody would, these people provide valuable services. If you get rid of them, output's going to decrease, prices are going to go up, and this is going to be a problem. So in one sense, he's reacting to that in terms of a popular way. But there's tension because the MAGA supporters don't like that at all. They like his hardline approach. They don't want him to make any exceptions, right? And look at what that's going to lead to. That could very well lead to what Trump hates more than anything else, being referred to as taco. Trump always chickens out. And if you see him backing off now on some of these immigration policies, he's going to be accused of that. And he's probably not going to like that. And we'll see what tension that leads to. He may go back, say, no, we're going to get rid of these people. And it doesn't matter what happens in terms of output and prices. And that's exactly the trouble you get into when you're trying to simultaneously combine populism with your own narcissistic instincts. And that's one of a number of things that are now coming up.
So then when you go through and look at it through that lens, I want to talk about some events we've seen recently. Let's talk about this weekend because we saw a military parade. President Trump was a big proponent of this. It cost, according to the Army, anywhere between $25 to $45 million to produce. Military parades haven't happened in America in a couple of decades at least. I mean, what do you make of what we saw on display this weekend?
It is a perfect illustration of the tension of his presidency. On the one hand, yes, military parades, in many ways, are the ultimate populist thing to do. You've won a war, you want to show appreciation, you take pride in your military, so you have an event. Makes perfect sense. Problem was, we didn't win a war. There's no reason to have this in terms of any specific event. Secondly, this really wasn't well coordinated with the military. I know of people who were there. I'm in D.C. and I got reports back, and it was a lackluster affair. The streets were, teeming with enthusiastic supporters. It was a pretty somber event. What this then turned out to be is not populism, but narcissism. Trump wanted this. He was absolutely excited when he saw this going on in France, and he says, I must have this. And he wanted the attention. And yes, I mean, the cost wasn't huge, but it was basically a dud in the sense that it did little to really generate populist support and was only used for him. And I think that was apparent. And I think probably at least any military people involved in this think, why did we do this? This is all was for his ego. So that was just an example of tension that just really was not good for the country.
And so I'm sure A, the weather didn't help, and B, the No Kings protests in major cities around the country cropping up to counter protest the event certainly didn't help either. But now I want to talk about how his leadership is impacting the American people. So first, let's look at immigration, because that is really has become almost a third rail issue in this country, especially when what we've seen in Los Angeles and protests throughout the country, anti-ICE demonstrations over the way ICE is handling deporting people. What do you make of that?
Problem here, and this is the problem certainly with DOGE and other policies, is you never get the big picture and most importantly, the end game. You get the symbols, right? You get the symbols of we're going to get rid of criminals, who are illegal immigrants, right? We're not going to allow foreign students, who are going to steal our secrets, all these kinds of things of that nature, right? What in the end is all this going to get us, right? When we think about deporting 2 million people, right? When we think about restricting students from coming here, so on and so forth, what is our economy going to look like? Are prices going to go down? Is employment going to go up? You never hear any discussion about that. And now, in certain pockets of the economy, we start seeing concerns. Wait a minute. You start getting rid of some of these workers, they're the only ones doing this, and the only people who want to do this. This is going to cause problems in production. This is going to hurt us because services aren't going to be available, or we're going to have to pay more for them. We're just starting to see rumblings of this. This is quite new, and these things do take time. But I think that's the big problem, is there's no vision of where this is taking us. And I think that's really the problem in selling it, at least to people who are sort of trying to be rational about it, as opposed to getting wrapped up in all the passion and anti-immigrant hate in this country. What are we going to get for it? And I just don't think that there's any statement about that in any serious way. But I think we're starting to see, yes, we know what we're going to get for it, and it's not going to turn out good.
I'm curious, when you hear the argument of something like, what is this going to do to the economy? No one wants these jobs. You'll have to pay more for the jobs. Republicans have countered that argument by saying, well, A, you should be hiring people who are here legally, Americans, and B, you should be paying people a fair wage. At that point, you're just exploiting some undocumented migrant. I mean, what do you make of that argument?
If it were true, it would be a valid argument. I mean, you first got to ask the question, why aren't they hiring legal people, right? And usually the answer is more than not, they don't want to do this work. Now, it is certainly true, by hiring illegals, we pay them less, and we don't have to worry about entitlements and all that kind of thing. But I think the truth is they feel, and I think it's probably right, that this is not what Americans want to do. And these people want to work in the fields and agriculture. We'll pay them less than we would if we had to get Americans. And again, if this were such a harmful policy, look at the big picture. Why isn't our unemployment rate much higher? In other words, if this were an activity that was denying Americans work, wouldn't we see this in the unemployment statistics? Because then these were jobs that they wanted, regular legal people, and couldn't get them, so they'd have to file for unemployment. I would think that this would all sort of rationalize, be able to be rationalized in terms of the little picture, if you will, and the overall macroeconomy, and we just don't see that. And that, I think, then is the concern with the counter argument, that this just really is not a strong source of threats to employment in this country. And I think this is something that economically works for, obviously, our producers, who, by the way, now are being targets. So Trump now wants to focus, he said this, on the people hiring illegal people. But then the question is, okay, what do you want to do with them? What are you going to get out of this? Instead of thinking constructively, okay, we realize this is an economic benefit to you, and hopefully we're convinced there's not an opportunity cost in the sense you really are denying employment to a large sector of the population. I don't think that's true, right? Then what do you want to do? And my sense would be the importance of targeting employers is to deal with the illegal problem. That is have some sort of guest workers. You know where these people are. They're responsible also for keeping track of their criminal records, or if anything like that happens, it's causing concerns about them being here, so on and so forth. That could make things more manageable, and that would be constructive and help safety if that's a concern, right? But at this point, we don't know. If Trump just says, "Look, we're going to threaten you, and if you hire illegal people, we're going to fine you and do other things." Again, what are we going to get for this? Is this going to help our economy? I just don't see the argument that is being made that it will.
Immigration is also an issue that is folded into President Trump's legislation, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is really a hallmark of his second term. It contains his signature tax and immigration policies. President Trump, ever since he came onto the scene politically, has been someone who's positioned himself as fighting for the little guy, railing against the liberal elites. But the CBO, which is nonpartisan, has said that this legislation will make the poorest in this country poorer, the richest in this country richer. It will leave millions of people uninsured due to Medicaid cuts. It will leave millions of people without food assistance because of cuts to SNAP. So, from the lens of calling President Trump a populist, what do you make of this legislation? Is this a populist legislation?
He's certainly marketing it as a populist legislation. Remember that's a key word. It's marketing it. But again, the fundamental problem with a lot of what he's done is you never get a very clear overview on how we're getting from here to there and what there looks like. So, when you're saying we want to pass this big, beautiful bill, okay, what are we going to get for this? Are your taxes going to be reduced? Yes, but who pays most of the taxes, right? So this is going to help the more affluent people. Lower income people don't pay that much. Some of them don't pay anything. So, this is just an example in terms of the narcissistic behavior of my instincts. Trump thinks, I think this is good, and likes to say, I make my decisions from my gut. My gut tells me we need to do these things that are part of this bill. Cutting certain spending, cutting certain government activities. I don't care about counter arguments that certain less affluent people really depend on these things. My gut tells me we need to do this. And the process then of doing it, we also can cut taxes. Again, my gut tells me these things are good. And I think also a problem then on the other side is a lot of people don't know exactly what's in this bill. And elites tell them it's bad, but they don't trust elites, and they certainly don't trust the media. If you tell them that, look, this is going to hurt you, they go, oh, I don't believe it. That's sort of where we got to in this country. But this is, I think, how it's been working for him to retain this sort of marketing populism approach, but largely doing things from his ego and his gut, which is a problem. So where this ends up is once we see the true effects of this legislation and policies, and they start hurting people, and we just saw an example of this where there was this concern in agriculture on immigrants and going back on this, then it's going to be a challenge for Trump. Are you going to back off on what you've been doing and realize it's having adverse effects and people are unhappy with you about it? Or are you going to double down and say, look, I want this, and take even a more autocratic approach to governance? That, I think, is the tension we have coming up ahead. And let me just quickly add, the one thing that's going to come soon, gas prices. With the conflict between Iran and Israel, there are now serious concerns of what this can do for gas prices in America, simply because of what that war can do and restrict the flow of petroleum through the Strait of Hormuz and other types of things of that nature. Gas prices start shooting up in this country. Then there's going to be complaints that, wait a minute, you've cut off our subsidies to electric vehicles, which is exactly what we need now. And you'll see again all that tension all over again. So that's coming up.
Well, let's look internationally and let's look abroad and what you think President Trump's leadership means for a few different conflicts we have been dealing with between Russia and Ukraine, as well as just last week, the continuing escalation between Israel and Iran. What do you think President Trump's leadership means for the future of these two conflicts?
Now, again, it's always uncertainty. The only certainty is somehow he wants to thrust himself in the middle of things to sort of look good. So, for example, with Israel and Iran, Trump does not take kindly to the fact that Israel appears to be going along. They thought of this attack, they decided to do it. Maybe they cleared it with the U.S., maybe they didn't. We don't know for sure. Trump says he knew, but they're doing it. And what that says is our efforts at diplomacy did not work. So our efforts to try to get, some sort of diplomatic understanding with Tehran to cut back on the nuclear weapons, that Israel was not waiting for that. They didn't believe it would happen, or they were impatient, and they just took off. So right there, again, these are things that Trump does not like. He wants to then stick himself, well, I knew of this, and by the way, I also discouraged Israel from killing the supreme leader. Who knows whether he did or he didn't. Netanyahu wouldn't comment on that. So that's the kind of role he'll play. But Israel's got their policy, and they are hell-bent on making it absolutely clear that Iran is not going to threaten them with nuclear weapons. I don't think there's any doubt that they're committed to that. And I don't think there's anything Trump can do. He's going to try to speak up every once in a while to say, I'm a big player here and you have to pay attention to me, but I don't think there's anything he can do. I think it's the same way with Russia and Ukraine, but it's a different way. Russia is committed to taking over Ukraine. That is Putin's policy. If we want to end, it's Putin has to go. But he's not going to have any diplomatic resolution to this. He's committed to it. And he's going to win is his goal, right? He's not going to, if he plays around with Trump, it'll just be a diversion. He wants to win, and he's committed to it. So again, Trump can tell stories that, yes, I'm trying to convince Putin to have some sort of diplomatic settlement. Zelensky isn't cooperating. Again, act like he's a player and trying to affect things, but he's not. Each key member abroad has their ambition, and Trump is not going to curb it. And it's frustrating to him, and I'm sure he'll pick on the weaker side. I think in Israel and Iran, there's nothing really he can do at all. I mean, he can say what he wants about Netanyahu. He's determined, and Iran is in real trouble. So the only thing he's trying to do there is tell them, surrender, otherwise they'll get bombed even more. That's the kind of thing he'll do. Similar kind of thing with Ukraine, give up something, be more flexible, more reasonable, or you'll be totally defeated. Well, they're not going to do that either. So it's going to be frustrating to see him try to be a big player, but he's not going to have any effective role. That's what I think.
Something that President Trump really wants to get done is a slew of tariff deals, a bunch of trade deals. And we are less than a month right now from that deadline of when the reciprocal tariffs were meant to go back into effect. What do you make of where we're at right now with those negotiations, and what are you looking for going forward? Because as of right now, we have, according to both Chinese and U.S. officials, a framework or a handshake to a framework of a deal with China. There are some other deals that are potentially in, the works, but nothing's really more concrete than that as we sit here right now.
We're seeing the same pattern, right? We're seeing, the key narcissistic thrust of, I go on my gut. So despite what all my colleagues in the economics profession think, that tariffs are a bad idea, Trump is absolutely committed to them and keeps on sort of trying to find ways to sort of push people to do them and say they'll be great things. And of course, we have enormous concerns that, no, they're not great things. They're going to raise prices, and they're not going to really address an employment problem that you think exists, and this is really not our problem. You want to stimulate employment, stimulate economic growth. That's what you should be doing. So I think it's more of the same. They'll be they'll be talking a good game about how important tariffs are. He'll try to exert leverage where he can, and there'll be discussions. But I think people now who are in foreign countries realize that if you stand up to Trump, you try to resist him, he'll have his little tantrums, but you can find ways to get things to slow down, especially if you point out this is going to be very hurtful to the United States. So China's a master at playing games. I mean, they love doing that kind of thing in real life. They love going to Las Vegas and gambling, and they're loving this. This is exactly the kind of thing they play into. I don't see any way that Trump is going to get any really significant concessions out of the Chinese. At the same time, Chinese are making it clear to us, look, there's stuff of us you want. And you obviously want rare earths. We have them. And don't think you can push us around and still get rare earths, right? So that's going to be the kind of thing that's going to be dangling there. With other countries, maybe it'll make a little more, a little less progress. But just generally, it's the same thing. You're telling a story that you're going to help America by making it easier for us to hire our own people and not to export goods and not rely on goods produced by other people. And you should believe me, right? But the evidence is going to tell you something else, that prices are going up, and truth be told, we're not really exporting that much. And at the same time, we're hurting ourselves because other countries are not going to send us things that we want. So it's, again, we're going to see this over and over again. The real question is, what happens when it hits a breaking point? That what he's done is harmful and the public does not like it, and they let him know. Is he going to back down, or is he going to actually double down and be more autocratic? That, I think, is the remaining question about the remaining part of his term.
When do you think that breaking point is? Because one of the top issues facing voters in the 2024 election that made the majority of voters vote for President Trump was the economy. And we're coming up on that July 9th deadline with tariffs. Do you think that point is when people feel the impact of tariffs? Do you think that point is if President Trump kicks the can down the road again when it comes to trade deals? And B, do you think that President Trump, he has been accused, there has been that joke, the acronym you mentioned earlier, Taco Trump, Trump always chickens out. He was not a fan of that when he heard that, when a reporter asked him about that. But do you think we're going to see on July 9th another pause, another kicking the can down the road? And will people like that?
I think that at this point, I think you're right that July 9th, there'll probably be more kicking cans down the road. Maybe he'll get some, quote, trade deal with somebody, and he'll make a big deal about that. I've got some trade deal with the UK. Won't probably amount to much, but he'll certainly push that, milk it for all it's worth. But I think in generally, it just, continues to be stalling. Again, I think it's on the other side now. People understand who he is and realize that he can be persuaded, or he can either be threatened, which people didn't think before, but he can be certain things that are going to hurt us if he acts against other countries, or he can be charmed and be more patient. So I think those kind of games are going to go on forever. What I'm more concerned about are some of these now bigger international issues, again, like energy prices. This business that's going on in the Middle East is pretty scary. And, that's a real thing that hurts people. We know that. And we'll have to see that's something beyond Trump's control. He's really not going to be able to do anything. And so the question is going to be, how is he going to handle a shock like that? People don't really recall. His first term was a pretty good first term in terms of what we call external shocks. Yes, it had the one bad one, and it was a bad one, COVID, but that came at the end. Before that, everything was smooth sailing, right? So the one chance we really had to see Trump's leadership skills came about in COVID, and his leadership skills were hardly great. So the question is, what happens when there's another shock coming up the pike? And there could very well be one on the energy side. How is he going to handle that? I think the trade stuff is going to go back and forth for a while. I don't see that as the big ticket item. But I'm a little bit more concerned now with what's going to be going on with the Middle East, because that's now getting to be scary.
Well, there is certainly a lot to look out for, a lot of developing situations, both domestically and abroad. And I hope as we continue to see the next iteration of them, you come back on and join me and break them down. Clifford Winston, I always appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.